Hi, everyone. My name is Julie Cruzal. I'm the Operations Manager at TAL Global, and I welcome you all to today's presentation of crime prevention and its complexities in a retail environment. This is the third free webinar in TAL Global's ongoing 2023 Security and Risk Management series, and we're very pleased to host you here today. Before I introduce today's speaker, there are a couple housekeeping items to cover. Today's webinar will be approximately 30 to 40 minutes long, and there will be a recorded version of this presentation available after today's broadcast. For those of you who don't already know us, TAL Global is an international security consulting and risk management firm with over 25 years of experience supporting domestic and international clients with a wide range of security and risk solutions. Today's webinar will be presented by TAL Global Managing Director of Retail Loss Prevention, Mike Keenan. With more than 35 years of professional retail loss prevention experience, Mike, a former foreign counterintelligence specialist with the FBI, has managed a wide spectrum of major retailers throughout North America, including Macy's, Ross, Mervyn's, Long's Drugs, and Gap, each with its own unique set of challenging features. He holds a bachelor's degree in criminal justice, is a certified protection professional with As Is International, a certified forensic interviewer, and is loss prevention certified and a licensed private investigator for the state of California. With that, I will turn it over to Mike.
Thank you, Julie. Well, hello, everyone. Today's webinar has some objectives. We want to try to understand the numerous security challenges facing retailers today, which are very challenging, and their objectives in keeping employees and customers safe. We want to learn effective retail loss control strategies and some industry best practices, and we'll identify some crime prevention solutions, including physical security and technology. This is going to be a broad overview. It's not going to go narrow and deep, but we are open to any questions you may have, and we certainly can go narrow and deep with you on any of those topics. Next slide, please. So let's talk about the inception of retail security. It's quite interesting. In 800 BC, Angoras were the very first marketplaces in Greece. And guess what? They did experience theft and loss. It came from external sources, from suppliers, and from their own people internally. But back then, punishments were pretty severe. They included mutilation, flogging, and sometimes even death. So right from the very beginning of retail commerce, there was a need for retail security. Doing some further research, I looked into the very first cash register, which was invented in 1879 by James Ritty. He was a saloon keeper in Ohio. And it was interesting because he designed that cash register specifically to stop theft, not to capture retail transactions, but to stop theft, which I thought was fascinating. So there's a history of retail security following commerce as it has evolved over the years. And the industry itself has evolved from retail security to the terms we use today, which are loss prevention or asset protection. Next slide, please. So let's talk about what is the objective of a retail loss prevention department. And that's to protect the assets of the organization. And what are those assets? There are people first and foremost, and that includes both employees and customers. Obviously, we need to protect the merchandise, but it also includes protecting property, your stores, warehouses, fulfillment centers, and corporate offices. You've got to protect your credit and your cash, and also information, which includes data and equipment. And finally, reputation. And we will go into detail on all of these as we go along. Next slide, please. So let's talk about people. We have employees and we have customers. One of the number one concerns that every retailer has today is safety. There are natural disasters, there are assaults, robberies that happen in the stores and in their workplaces. And of course, we hear a lot about active shooters. So retailers are very aware of how important it is to protect their people, which is a complex scenario. And then, of course, you need to be worried about internal theft from employees, which includes merchandise, fraud, cash, company property, or information. And this is a high risk because employees basically have the keys to the store. They are able to get access to virtually everything. So you need to make sure that you have protections in place to protect your merchandise and everything else from your own employees. And then customers. Again, safety is the #1 priority. Your customers can be there when there's natural disasters, assaults, robberies, and again, active shooters. So customers need to be taken into consideration when you're looking at protecting the people, which are assets to your organization. Without customers, you wouldn't have commerce. So safety is always first. And then you have a risk from customers with external theft, shoplifters, habitual offenders, organized retail crime, or ORC, which you've heard a lot about. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, robberies and burglaries. So protecting people is very, very important to every single organization. So how do you do that? Next slide, please. So with employees, it's critical that a retailer has comprehensive plans for risk situations. I'm going to just use the example. We've talked about natural disasters and robberies and other things, but using active shooters, the importance of having a plan and pre-planning is in a situation with an active shooter or an active assailant. We talk about, running away, hiding, or fighting. That's pretty common in our industry. Well, if the employees can't get away, there needs to be a place where they can shelter in place or lock up and hide. And pre-work as part of these plans is critical so you can identify those locations and let the employees know where they are. And then you must train all of your employees. Training is critical. I'm going to talk about that later, but employees need to be trained in these plans because they are the ones that would execute them. And then I highly recommend conducting drills. If you look at law enforcement agencies, fire departments, emergency response teams, they're always conducting drills. Why? So they know what to do when something actually happens. And retailers put those plans in place and conduct drills to make sure that they're executed properly. Now with customers, in situations, it's very possible that you're going to have a store full of customers. So employees should be trained to assist customers. Again, natural disasters, the different things that can happen. And I'm going to use active shooter again, but in a situation where that's happening, by training your employees to allow the customers to use lockup and hide locations, you are obviously helping to protect your customers. So people protection is really important. And as I said, it includes employees and customers in every situation. Next slide, please. So merchandise, let's talk about merchandise because that's one of the things that is most impacted by loss. So with merchandise, you have internal theft by employees, which can happen in many ways, just simply outright theft of the merchandise, fraudulent transactions like no sales and then taking the money, or voiding out transactions, or underringing, getting things, selling things under their actual price. Doing price switching, where tickets are actually switched so that you're buying something expensive with a less expensive price ticket on it. And then pass-offs, collusion with outsiders. So you may have heard this term sweethearting. This is the same thing, it's pass-offs. And it is the #1 way in which employees get merchandise out of the stores because it's very difficult to detect, because of the fact that the person is ringing a transaction. They may underring it or they may add some items to the bag, but it looks like a legitimate transaction is occurring. But there is a little helpful hint here, and that is that employees generally don't pass off or do sweethearting deals with people they don't know. So it will oftentimes be a friend or family, and a supervisor in a store should be alert to that. So when transactions are being rung with an associate's friends or family, there should be a high alert that this could possibly be a fraudulent transaction. So merchandise gets taken by employees, but it also gets taken by our customers. So I mentioned a little earlier about organized retail crime, and it has really been all across social media. You've seen it on the news with smash and grabs, flash mobs, grab and runs, people just coming in and loading up large quantities of merchandise and walking out. Well, this is organized crime where they're taking this stuff in bulk and they have places where they can sell it, fences, and offload it. And it is creating huge losses to the retailers because of the large amount of merchandise they take with each theft. But there is still shoplifting. Your casual and opportunistic shoplifter, the person who's in the store, see something they like, they look around, there's nobody watching or the merchandise isn't protected in any way, and they simply take it. Organized retail crime is a type of theft that happens where large volumes of merchandise are taken at one time. With shoplifting, it may not be that way, but a shoplifter can hit you over and over and over again, and that adds up. And that leads us to our habitual offenders, who are people who come in on a regular basis to steal. This is oftentimes a drug user who's coming in, taking product and going out and selling it so that they can feed their habit. And they'll just come in over and over and over again until you are able to stop them. And then also customers will do fraudulent returns. They will take merchandise that they never paid for and attempt to return it. So having strategies in place to identify fraudulent returns helps reduce external theft. And then another area that you have to be alert to is theft from the supply chain. So things can be taken from warehouses, fulfillment centers, and even cargo theft, where basically an entire trailer is taken. And collusion from the outside often happens with warehouse and cargo thefts because usually it's either large items or bulk items, and an outsider working with a warehouse person or with a driver can work together to end up stealing something. So I want to take a minute here to explain shortage or shrinkage, which is something I'm sure you've heard if you know anything at all about retail loss prevention. And that is the number that is determined that indicates how much merchandise has been lost. And obviously that affects your profitability. And what it really is it's made up of several things: internal theft, external theft, and what is called systemic errors, where the system can cause problems. There can be errors in processing. For example, I worked with one retailer that liked to put individual items in boxes and ship them out to the stores because they wanted to have an experience where there were just individual items in the stores and not large amounts, which they believed led to more sales. But this method of putting them in the boxes individually led to breakage, which is also loss. But they understood that, and it was part of their business model, and they were quite successful, even though they took that systemic loss due to breakage. And then the merchandise is inventoried on periodic basis, sometimes once a year, sometimes twice a year, sometimes more often. And shortage comes from the difference between what the inventory says you own versus what your books say you should own. And that difference is your shortage percent, which is a percent of sales. And that is how retailers measure their loss and are able to illustrate how it is impacting their profitability. And lately, we've heard a lot of retailers talking about how theft has been impacting their profitability, which impacts their ability to staff stores, to have product, even to stay open. We've heard about stores closing and blaming it on theft. So it is really critical. And of course, if their profitability is impacted, it can also lead to higher prices. So protecting the merchandise is critical to every retailer. Next slide, please. So how do retailers protect merchandise? Most of us are very familiar with electronic article surveillance, EAS, which are basically the little hard tags that you see pinned onto merchandise. Or you might see a liquor cap, a plastic cap that goes over the top of a liquor bottle. These things have a radio frequency inside of them that will activate when you take it out between usually a couple of pedestals that are visible, or sometimes it's in the floor or overhead. But when the tag interacts with the system, it sends off an alarm. And that is designed to deter the person from stealing them, knowing that they may get stopped at the door. This has not been working that effectively for ORC, as we have seen, but it still works very effectively for your casual and opportunistic shoplifter, as well as your habitual offenders. Locking cases, you're seeing more and more of those. High value product is being locked up. Certainly, it's always been that way with jewelry and electronics, but we're seeing it expand to more and more places. And I think there's been an increase in the installation of impact-resistant glass. We've seen these jewelry stores where people have come in and smashed the cases, and that's leading to hardening the cases to make them resistant to that kind of smash and grab violence, really, to break through it. So you're seeing a lot more of locking cases, and in those cases, impact-resistant glass. And then you're seeing a couple other things like single item release fixtures. Razor blades are a good example of that. There's sometimes a little twist dial that you can only get one package of razor blades at a time. And that's really just designed for someone not to be able to do a shelf sweep and take a whole bunch at one time. There are some standalone products like spider wraps, which are basically wire that go around a box. For example, a lot of times electronic boxes that also has a little EAS tag on it that can beep when it goes through the system, but some of them are also beeping when you try to defeat them. They actually beep right there when you're trying to remove it. And that again acts as a deterrent. And then we'll see cables to allow customers to handle the product. So you see that a lot of times electronics with phones, and you see it with tools where the customer can pick up the item and handle it, but if they try to walk away with it, it's cabled to a fixture. So those are really some of the common physical things that you see, and I can tell you that the vendors in the industry are working hard to come up with more and more technology and physical security like these items to help protect that. And then the last thing I have down there is radio frequency identification, RFID, which is basically individual production identification of each item. So it's put on when you're tagging the goods during the production process. So it's hitting the floor and it's already tagged. And each of those tags has an individual identifier. And currently it's a little expensive. There are some retailers that have implemented it, but I do believe that it'll be the future, and it will enable stores and retailers to manage their product very specifically. All right, next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about some technology that helps with theft. Exception reporting is critical. So POS systems, which are point of sale systems, or your cash registers, supply chain, merchandise returns, all of these things have computer tracking. So all of your transactions are captured in supply chain, all of your movement of merchandise, when people make returns, all of this stuff is captured in your system. Exception reporting is designed to pull out exactly what it says, exceptions. So what you're doing is you're looking for things that are outside of the norm. And I'll give you a good example. So if a store has a lot of voids at their cash registers, what does that mean? Does it mean that people are voiding out sales and stealing? Or is there some other issue? But exception reporting will tell you that store 1234 has a lot more voids than the norm. That would cause the retailer to take a closer look. And one example, many times it did lead to identifying employees who were in fact voiding sales out and stealing the money. But in one situation, they were doing voids to make change for people who wanted to use the coin for a local bus. And so we were able to stop that by prohibiting employees from using that way of giving the customer the change that they were requesting. So exception reporting is critical to a retail loss prevention team to identify in all of their systems what is out of the norm. And then that gives you something to go investigate to try to identify wrongdoing. And many times you identify things that are causing loss that are not theft. As I mentioned earlier, they're systemic. And so you can correct those problems with exception reporting because it's telling you where to go look very specifically. And then of course, CCTV is everywhere these days. Virtually every retailer has some form of CCTV, and it's critical because it gives you a video record of what is going on in your locations, and it can be used in so many ways. And I'm not going to go into all those details, but clearly it's used for investigations. It's used for situations that involve safety. If someone slips and falls, you can see what happened. It's able to be used for monitoring operations. How well is the store running? All of these things CCTV does. But in the loss prevention arena, working with video analytics, which enables you to identify what you want the video to look for, and then notifying you without you having to sit in front of the screen and watch it forever. And so, as an example, identifying high-risk situations. In one retailer, I had a lot of problems where people were putting merchandise in front of emergency exits in the back rooms. And of course, if there was an emergency situation, that would have been a disaster. In addition to that, if OSHA had come in, that would have been a violation that could potentially have shut down the store. And every time we tried to address it, we would say, hey, we found this during an audit, you need to fix it. And no one knew who did it. Oh, yes, we won't do that again, but we don't know who did it. So no one was being held accountable. Well, using video analytics, we were able to identify when an emergency exit was blocked, which was good because we could then notify the store remotely and tell them to clear it. But more importantly, we could tell exactly who left the product there. And once we were able to do that, we could hold those people accountable. And after a very short time, our emergency exits were not blocked anymore. So video analytics can really help there. Another thing that many retailers are doing are security operations centers, where they are taking this video and shooting it into a central location, including exception reporting, where they can look at everything in one place. And in an emergency situation, obviously these security operations centers become critical in watching what's happening out in all of your stores, but it can also be used very effectively for, again, identifying high-risk situations, as I mentioned. And then I just want to touch on really quickly AI, artificial intelligence. AI is going to, and already is, reshaping analytics and exception reporting in retail loss prevention. It is able to learn. I don't see AI replacing investigations or interviews, for example, of employees who are suspected of doing something wrong. But what it will do, it will certainly refine and even be more effective in identifying those situations that the loss prevention teams needs to take a closer look at. So I envision at some point with artificial intelligence that investigators will not even have to look at exception reporting or CCTV themselves. AI will identify exactly what they need to look at, and they'll make a copy of the register tape and a copy of the video and send it right to the investigator to look at. And it will make them much more efficient and identify wrongdoing quicker than people can do it the way they're doing it now. So technology is critical to the future of retail loss prevention. Next slide, please. So property protection, that's an important part of the loss prevention team's responsibility. They've got to protect their facilities, which are the stores, the warehouses, fulfillment centers, corporate offices. All of those things need to be protected. And you do that through a lot of things, but alarm systems. One of the things that's coming, it's already in place in a lot of places, is video verification of an alarm, but many police departments won't respond these days because of the volume of false alarms unless the alarm has been video verified. So is something that's very critical, in my opinion, for alarm systems where you're tying them in to your video systems. And you need to protect yourself from a burglar alarm standpoint so that intrusions are identified, and of course from fire. And then CCTV, remote monitoring is a technology that many of us have now in our homes, where you can just look and see what's happening at home on your phone. Well, it's the same thing with loss prevention. We can look into stores and see what's happening remotely, which saves a lot of travel and makes us much more effective and much more efficient. And it is a great component of the CCTV strategy that you put in place. And then access control is very, very critical, especially when you think about warehouses and fulfillment centers and offices where it's not open to the public like a store. And it's critical that you know who's coming into your building. With all the violence in the workplace situations, you need to protect your employees. And there are many ways to control access. It's locks or card readers with systems, pedestals, people barriers. All of these things are going to make sure that only your employees are able to come into the systems or into your facilities. But the systems, what they do is, for an example, if you had an emergency situation and you had an access control system where everybody badged their way in and out of their locations, in a situation, you would know exactly who was in the building, which would be really valuable anytime you had a situation like a natural disaster or an active assailant or something, to know who was there and who was not there. So access control not only protects the perimeter and lets you know who's in your store, it can also help you in situations like I just identified. Next slide, please. So one of the most important things to think about, and this really goes with any security, but definitely we do it in the loss prevention world, which is to start with the design. There's a term, harden the target, make it more difficult for someone to take advantage of you. And you do that in many ways, and there's different ways to do it. Some is with how do you protect from someone getting into your office areas or your manager areas, or how they get into your warehouse. So those things are important. It starts with the design, but you want to take things into consideration like visibility. So if you have a retail store and it has lots and lots of high shelves, no one from the front of the store or around the store can really see. So it's important to be looking at the very component of your facility to look at how do you create a visibility so that people can see the entire store, which creates better customer service because you can see if customers need help, but it also can be a deterrent to someone who's thinking about doing something wrong. In your back offices, that's where you could be vulnerable to a robbery. So it's important that your manager's office or your cash office can be secured. Do you have safes back there? How do you protecting money so that if someone wanted to come in and rob you, how are they going to do that? And if you build your facility in such a way that the manager's office is in the back, secured, it's going to be less likely that people do those things. Entrances and exits. We talked about access control and locks, but things like roll down gates are very effective at protecting a store from a break-in in the evening hours or when they're closed. Bollards, which are the concrete posts that people put in front of their stores, they're there to protect you from someone trying to drive a vehicle into your store or even into your corporate office, which has happened. And then glass protection. Many retailers have a lot of glass windows. That's how they display their products and try to attract customers in. Well, those can be broken easily and people can enter that way. So security film on glass is a very cost-effective way of doing it, or installing shatter-resistant glass in the first place provides good protection. I talked earlier about active shooter safe rooms in your facilities to identify them in advance and make sure that they're lockable and that people can be secure in those rooms. For example, you don't want to have a room that has half glass walls as one of your safe rooms if there are others that are available. So my recommendation here is to blend loss control into the planning of all facilities, because it really starts with the planning, and by hardening the target, you can actually help better keep people safe and protect your merchandise and your property. Next slide, please. I wanted to touch on security guards and loss prevention agents. Security guards are primarily a deterrent. They are there to observe and report. There are some retailers who use armed guards, but very, very few, because there's a concern of any type of gunfire discharge in a store and wanting to eliminate any kind of collateral damage. So most security guards in a retail environment are not armed. They are there as a deterrent, and they will deter the casual and opportunistic shoplifter. Maybe not so much the organized retail crime, because that person is in there with a purpose and they are willing to basically fight their way out. But security guards are definitely there from a safety standpoint and providing, hopefully, an assurance to the customers that the retailer cares about their safety. Many large retailers have their own loss prevention agents or detectives or whatever you want to call them. They're usually proprietary and they're actually trained by the retailer. And these people are experts in catching shoplifters, but also really working on the things that help keep people safe, how to protect the product, do investigations. There's a lot more than that. But most retailers have stopped making apprehensions for external theft. They do try to recover the merchandise, or they'll bring back people who are cooperative. But if someone is combative or tries to get away, most of the retailers have avoided trying to create confrontations. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And one is that even if they catch the people, the laws in most states have been relaxed. There's been less prosecutions by the DAs, and the police will say that they have higher priorities because in many states, the amount of theft that needs to occur before it becomes a felony, which would be of more interest to the police to investigate, has risen dramatically. For example, in California, it went from $400 to $950. And that's a pretty big jump, which means people can take a lot of merchandise before it elevates to the level of a felony. And also, retailers are concerned about a bad stop. That could result in a lawsuit, or it could go viral, which impacts the company reputation, which I'll talk about. But going viral and impacting the company reputation can actually be more damaging financially by a long shot than what the person was actually taking. So you'll see guards, and in some locations you may see agents, and they are working hard to try to prevent theft and stop it wherever possible. Next slide, please. So credit and cash, obviously most retailers still take cash. And so cash control is extremely important. You need to track and audit it. There are many little tips, limit how much cash can be in your tills. So if you're robbed, it's a fixed amount, or at least a certain amount. I recommend frequent armored carrier pickups if you do a lot of cash business, so that you're not accumulating money in your safes, which can be a temptation not only to a robber, but also to an employee when they see that kind of money. So the more often your money gets taken to the bank, the less risk you have. There's a lot of products out there. Smart safes are one of them, where basically you have a 2-key safe, or you have some component where it is tracking your money for you. It can even transmit it to the bank in advance. So smart safes, there's a variety of them, but they are a very effective way of controlling your cash and preventing access into those safes so that it won't be stolen. And then counterfeits are actually still a big problem. And so it's important to have a counterfeit detection program in place. Ultraviolet lights are usually the best. There are pens and things like that, but counterfeit detection is really critical because a lot of fraudsters like to try to pass the counterfeit off into retailers, and they will actually go to retailers that don't have any counterfeit detection devices because they're going to have a greater success rate in getting those counterfeit bills across. And of course, if you take a counterfeit bill, the bank is not reimbursing you. So it is a loss of cash to your organization. So it's part of your cash control. Credit card procedures, fraud monitoring, just very quickly, external cards, you should have a system to validate it at the register when they make the purchase. There's tap to pay. And then some retailers have proprietary cards. And retail loss prevention doesn't get too involved in this because it's really done more systemically, but it is important to understand and know that this is an area where a company can get victimized if it doesn't have the right controls in place. All right, next slide, please. So information. This is another one where most retail loss prevention departments do not also have responsibility for IT security, meaning the actual protection of the data, the firewalls, and all the controls that go into place there. So I'm really going to just touch upon what retail loss prevention is responsible for, and that's usually the protection of data and IT equipment. And that is your data centers. So you would be protecting the building or the area of your building that has a data center with a heightened level of security so that you're preventing people from being able to go in and access your data through any kind of physical means. And then you also have to be aware of protecting company provided devices like employee computers, credit card terminals in the stores, registers, handheld scanners. All of these things can cause a loss if they get into the wrong hands. So you need to protect them as well. Most data breaches are caused by employees who unintentionally enable outside access to internal systems. And we've heard of what this is, clicking on an unsafe link, which phishing is part of that, where people are just sending these things out and hoping that someone will click on it. And if they click on it, now they have an ability to work their way into the system. So it's very important to make people aware of that. And then what to do if they lose their company provided devices. And also, what does the company do? How quickly can they shut down that device to prevent anyone from getting unauthorized access? So these are things that the loss prevention department can get involved in that are not actually protecting the data itself. As I said, that's what the IT security professionals do. But the other thing that is really valuable that your loss prevention team can do is training and awareness of your employees, because that's critical to preventing the data breaches, because you want to make them aware on a regular basis. Don't click on an unsafe link. Make sure you're not visiting inappropriate websites, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the ways that you can test this clicking on unsafe link is actually to do awareness with audits. Awareness with audits works really well because you're letting people know. And when I say awareness with audits, you tell employees you're going to do this so that they know you're doing it. And that awareness makes them look at these things, say, oh, this could be an audit. I better not click on it, which gets you to your end result. So there are many things that loss prevention can help with respect to IT. And they should take advantage of it because IT departments generally don't have the same training and awareness capabilities as your loss prevention department does. Next slide, please. So reputation, I touched upon this earlier, but poorly handled incidents can go viral. And if they go viral, they can directly impact sales. We've seen that there was breaches in companies or other things that have happened that have led customers to not shop in that retailer. And some of those things are negative customer interactions, poorly executed apprehensions, physical altercations that take place in the store, robberies, data breaches. All of these things happen, but it's how you handle them that will enable the retailer to protect its reputation. So what I recommend there is ensuring that all loss prevention situations are done in partnership with legal counsel, human resources, public relations, and company leadership, because handling those situations is a company project. And I mean that in the way that just trying to handle it within loss prevention is not necessarily going to protect you if it goes viral or things like that. So immediately letting these people that I mentioned know that something happened enables the team to mobilize and get on top of the situation before it can lead to a negative incident or negative publicity for the retailer. So reputation is really important, and loss prevention can definitely help or hurt if they don't operate properly. Next slide, please. So training and awareness. I really want to emphasize this because to me, critical types of things that happen within the organization, training and awareness is the best way for the organization to respond to those things. And in the loss prevention area, there's a couple of little phrases that I think are very relevant. And one is the best deterrent to internal theft is good supervision. So if you think about training and awareness, if you train your managers on how to understand, identify, and prevent internal theft, that supervision will do that. And it's very effective because everyone knows if something is being watched, if people are aware, they're less likely to steal. And in my time, I interviewed a lot of dishonest employees, and dishonest employees will tell you who they'll steal from and who they won't. And the common denominator is really who is aware. So spending time training your supervisors in internal theft awareness and what they can do to prevent it is a very worthwhile investment of your time. And then the second phrase is the best deterrent to external theft is good customer service. And I can tell you that that works. A good customer service experience will deter external theft. Now, unfortunately, it's not going to affect organized retail crime or these people who are determined, but it will impact the casual or opportunistic shoplifter who will not steal if there is a risk to them of being detected. And a lot of people do that. So good customer service not only helps improve your sales and improve your brand and all the other things that good customer service does, it is actually an excellent deterrent to external theft. And so I really think those two phrases are the foundation to a good loss prevention training and awareness program. And it's all about education. Employees must be aware of their role in how they protect the assets of the company, because employees are basically a critical part of any effective loss prevention strategy because they're the ones that are executing it. So they need to know what their role is. And I believe loss prevention plays a big part in making sure that they understand that. And then partnership. Loss prevention supports the profitability of an organization. And they do it in many ways. And one of those ways is, of course, protecting the merchandise and making sure that people are safe. And they do that with partnership. They work together with all the organizations and all the other areas of the company so that they are a team going after whatever the challenge is. And that partnership is absolutely essential to the success of any program that a loss prevention executive tries to roll out. But that partnership can go both ways. It's not necessarily all loss prevention. So one of the things that I used in several retailers was a very proactive program where we trained managers how to use CCTV as an operational effectiveness tool. So for example, if they were gone for the evening or a weekend, they could come back in and look at their CCTV and see what happened, but not use it as a gotcha tool, but to use it as a tool to go back and operate no differently if they had been there. So for example, if they saw large lines and no one responding to it, we would train them in how would you handle that if you were there in the store that day, and then educate the people so that they know what to do when there are long lines when the manager isn't there. And that's the key. What ends up happening by using CCTV effectively, you can give the impression that the manager is there all the time. And when you do that, the execution by your employees improves. So it's using a traditional loss prevention tool to help better run the business. And then training awareness when it comes to employee safety, teaching employees de-escalation, which is really important in a retail environment because of the fact that there's oftentimes angry customers and, quite frankly, angry employees. By teaching people de-escalation techniques, you can hopefully de-escalate a situation before it expands into violence. Teaching them how to respond to a robbery, not to get involved, not to resist, but to cooperate and then report later. And then active shooter, we touched upon, training them in what to do in an active shooter situation. You know, are they going to run if they can, which is the number one most important thing to do if you can, or do they need to shelter in place, or do they need to fight back? All that training is out there, but it's up to each retailer to make sure that employees understand that and are well trained in it so that if it does happen, they know what to do. Next slide, please. Well, thank you very much, and I will turn it back over to Julie.
Thank you, Mike. Normally at this point, we move into the live Q&A portion of the presentation, but since today's is a recorded version, Mike would be happy to address all questions the viewing audience may have directly by email. And you can see there on this slide, his email address is mkeenan@talglobal.net. So thanks again, Mike. We hope this information has been useful and informative for our audience. And this concludes today's presentation. Our next free webinar in the series will be sometime in June, again at 11 a.m. Pacific time. So be on the lookout for the invitation and please join us again then. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.